Hello and welcome to MEELive. I'm Mathilda Mallinson. It's Tuesday, the 27th of January, 2026. Today, ICE, Minneapolis, and a not-so-United States of America. Here are the latest updates. Immigration Patrol Chief Gregory Bovino is expected to leave Minneapolis this week, along with several other immigration officers, in what may mark a shift in the White House's position following the city's second fatal shooting by an ICE officer this month. Gregory Bovino rose to national attention as the face of Trump's controversial immigration crackdowns by Immigration Customs Border Enforcement, or ICE. His withdrawal comes amid weeks of anti-ICE protests in the city, escalated when ICE agents shot and killed mother-of-three Renee Good in early January and ICU nurse Alex Pretty over this weekend. In Bovino's place, President Donald Trump is sending border czar Tom Homan to lead ICE operations in Minneapolis. Homan, who will report directly to the president, supports Trump's aggressive deportation campaign, but brings field experience of over 40 years, including under the Obama administration. Now, Bovino's exit comes amid a powerful public backlash to Trump's immigration crackdown across the US. The government's point-blank refusal to investigate the two shootings has also prompted criticism from Republicans and federal officials, calling for de-escalation in Minneapolis and warning of a political backlash in this year's midterm elections. Minnesota's Republican candidate for governor, Chris Medell, dropped out of the race on Monday, saying he couldn't defend ICE operations in the state. On the same day, Republican Senator Ted Cruz called for government restraint.
I think the administration could do better is the tone with which they're describing this. That immediately when an incident like this happens, they come out guns blazing, that we took out a violent terrorist, hooray.
If Republicans fear a backlash, it is not without cause. A YouGov poll conducted hours after Pretty's shooting on Saturday found that more Americans now support abolishing ICE than oppose it, and a majority disapprove of its conduct. Stay tuned to get the latest from the streets of Minneapolis and for a full fact check of MAGA's many ICE claims.
Major breaking news overseas this morning. As we go to air, chaos is erupting on the streets of Minneapolis.
President Trump's hope and wish and demand for the resistance and chaos to end today.
Fuck ICE! Fuck ICE! Fuck ICE! Our immigrants are under attack! What do we do? Stand up, fight back!
People have had enough. This is the third shooting now in less than 3 weeks, and now this is the second American citizen that's been killed. It's the third shooting within 3 weeks.
And we are a very tight-knit community, I would say, comparable to every other state. So it's really beautiful to see everyone get together like this and fight against these injustices.
I thought it was terrible, kidnapping children, just grabbing people off the street. He knew it was wrong, so he did participate in the protests.
He loved his country, but he hated what people were doing to it.
If there have been scenes of chaos on the streets of Minneapolis, it is not without cause. 3 weeks, 2 killings, and 0 investigations. Trump's government has blamed domestic terrorists, illegal aliens, and the Democrats.
But let's be clear about the circumstances which led to that moment on Saturday. This tragedy occurred as a result of a deliberate and hostile resistance by Democrat leaders in Minnesota. The president is fulfilling the will of the people by arresting and removing these threats from our country in cities from Los Angeles to New York and, yes, Minneapolis. Yet Democrat leaders in Minnesota with sanctuary city policies have actively defied federal immigration law and the will of the people. And as a result of that defiance, 2 Minnesotans have now tragically lost their lives on the streets of Tim Walz's state.
Many protesters, however, are peacefully marching and in some cases legally observing law enforcement officers. They have said that seeing masked officers abducting people from their homes looks less like law enforcement and more like invasion. Operation Metro Surge began in December 2025. It's the largest immigration enforcement operation ever carried out, according to the Department of Homeland Security. And it's targeting the state of Minnesota, a state that didn't vote for President Trump or his mass deportation campaign. After weeks of hardening in the face of protests, Trump has announced today he will withdraw the patrol commander and some other ICE agents from the city of Minneapolis. Will that satisfy those taking to the streets? We speak now to Dieu Do from the Minnesota Immigrant Rights Action Committee, or MIRAC. Dieu Do, welcome to MEE, and thank you so much for joining us. Could you just paint us a picture from what you've seen on the streets today? We've just learned Gregory Bovino will be leaving, ICE's presence may be reduced. Is that enough to pacify local protesters like yourself?
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me today. And, you know, when we learned that Gregory Bovino was going to be ordered to leave Minnesota, and there's a number of agents being ordered to leave, we shouldn't expect a fascist government to act in good faith. And there's been no public details, no transparency about how many agents are leaving, about the timeline and what this will look like. And ultimately, it's not enough. We've seen 2 neighbors now be killed by ICE with no investigation, no accountability. We've seen countless protesters and observers and everyday people like myself being brutalized and harmed by ICE agents. And we need to demand more. We shouldn't let our guard down and think that, this new tactic that they're using is acting in good faith. We should continue to have our guard up, and we should continue to protect neighbors and community members like we have been the last year, but especially since Operation Metro Surge started.
But what does that look like? I mean, some activist groups, some protesters, they're working to monitor ICE, preaching non-intervention, stand back and just observe. Others are actively obstructing ICE agents attempting to carry out raids. Can I just ask, what is your approach, or what is your organization's approach to direct intervention against ICE's actions?
Yeah, there's been, a variety of tactics being used and strategies used by the community. We've seen folks do community patrolling where they, stand in street corners, especially on streets along cultural corridors where there's a lot of immigrant-owned businesses and people of color own their businesses, and are keeping watch of suspicious activity, of suspicious vehicles, and reporting it to their local neighborhood rapid response network as soon as they see either ICE agents or people suspected to be ICE agents. Because ICE agents know that when they're being watched, when there's people observing, that they're less likely to detain someone and less likely to harm people. So we've been doing that. There's been folks who have been, protesting really early in the morning at the Federal Whipple building where ICE agents leave for the day to go terrorize our communities. And they've been, tracking when ICE agents leave and in what direction, all the way to tracking different license plate numbers and just like that kind of information and details of ICE agents as well. So there's a variety of tools being used to patrol the community, but also a variety of tools being used for mutual aid to support individuals and families directly.
But none of what you described just then sounds like what the Trump administration is depicting on the streets, of people like yourself violently intervening against ICE agents. How would you respond to that depiction of what's going on in Minneapolis?
Yeah, I mean, they're more worried about the protesters and what we're protesting, at the end of the day. And yeah, it's incredibly infuriating as someone who lives in Minnesota, as Minnesotans who are experiencing the federal occupation of Minnesota, and seeing this rhetoric and seeing this disinformation being spread about what's happening. Minnesotans have been practicing our constitutional rights, and our constitutional rights are being violated by the federal government. And they're going on TV, going on press tours saying that we're being violent when they're the ones who have been using tear gas, pepper spray, flashbangs, and as we've seen, has killed members of our community. I don't think there's anything that protesters can do to justify the level of violence that the federal government has perpetuated. And there's nothing that we can do to escalate the situation. Everything that they've done is just they've chosen to escalate. There's nothing we can do to give them more reason to escalate.
And how representative are your views and the views of other protesters of the views, citywide or statewide? We can trace the government's decision, right, to launch ISIS' biggest campaign in Minnesota, specifically to Trump's controversial comments about the local Somali community back in December, right? He described them as garbage in clearly racist terminology. But he was also referring to a specific fraud scandal in which some Somalis have been convicted. Now, just to be clear, for everyone watching, data on crime and immigration in America consistently shows a negative correlation. So foreign nationals statistically commit less crime than natives, but perception matters. Not speaking for yourself, speaking, broadly here, how concerned are people in Minnesota about rising immigration, about unauthorized immigration? Are there any who welcome ICE's presence?
I think it's an issue that's top of mind for every single person in Minnesota. I mean, on Friday, we had the first general strike in the U.S. in 80 years, and the protest was in Minneapolis, the march was, and over 200,000 people were at the march. I think that just speaks to the level of power and the level of solidarity that folks are feeling on the ground. It's top of mind for everyone. And, ICE has been an entity that's terrorized our communities since 2003. Through multiple presidential administrations. But I think especially in this moment, we see when there's a federal government agency with unchecked power, with no oversight, with seemingly boundless resources and funds, you see the level of terror, the level of brutality, and the level of just constitutional violations that they're willing to commit. So I think it's an issue that, I think that's why Minnesotans are showing up so hard, because we understand, everyone understands in our state, it's not just about fighting for the rights of Minnesotans anymore, it's fighting for the rights of every person on American soil, because this is going to threaten every person's rights, no matter who you are in this country.
Thank you for taking us through that. And just before we let you go, I'd love you to help people watching understand how the local police fit into all of this. It's not been many years since Minneapolis saw massive protests break out in the form of Black Lives Matter marches. This was following the murder of George Floyd by a local police officer, Derek Chauvin. Now, back then, it was local police at the heart of public anger. Today, it's federal agents, and local police chiefs have been among those criticizing their presence. As a protester in Minneapolis right now, how do you feel about the local police's role in all this? Do you feel that they're a protective layer against the federal agents, or the opposite?
I think that many folks in Minnesota don't feel protected by local law enforcement. And that hasn't changed since the federal occupation in Minnesota. I think that, the Minneapolis police chief and other leadership in local law enforcement has been very vocal about their opposition to federal agents. But we've seen before this federal occupation that they have assisted federal agents in immigration enforcement. We've seen them support these activities. We've seen them not hold themselves accountable for a number of different things, including collaborating with federal agents. But we also, there's no protective layer between the community and federal agents when there's police there. I think that folks at home should know that, at the end of the day, we keep each other safe and we protect each other, and the community grassroots is doing all these patrols to take care of the community. The police have been very vocal, but they have not done anything to make people feel more safe or more secure during this federal occupation.
Dieu Do, thank you so much for joining us and for that insight into your community and its mindset right now. Now, it's not just on the streets of Minneapolis where the government and its citizens or federal and local authorities are coming into conflict. A narrative battle is also playing out in the wake of 2 fatal killings by ICE agents in the city in the space of less than 3 weeks.
That's fine, dude. I'm not mad at you. It's very clear that this individual was harassing and impeding law enforcement operations.
Ramming an ICE officer with your car, that's what justifies being shot.
This was an act of domestic terrorism.
Why was Renee Good unfortunately and tragically killed?
Are you asking me my opinion? Because an ICE agent acted recklessly and killed her unjustifiably.
Oh, okay. So you're a biased reporter with a left-wing opinion.
What do you want?
An individual approached U.S. Border Patrol officers with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. The officers attempted to disarm this individual, but the armed suspect reacted violently.
The agents attempted to disarm the individual, but he violently resisted.
Fearing for his life and for the lives of his fellow officers around him, an agent fired defensive shots.
A Border Patrol agent fired defensive shots.
The suspect also had 2 magazines with ammunition in them that held dozens of rounds. He also had no ID.
The suspect also had 2 loaded magazines and no accessible ID.
He was pronounced dead at the scene.
This looks like a situation
where an individual arrived at the scene to inflict maximum damage on individuals
and massacre law enforcement.
When you are bearing arms and you are confronted by law enforcement, you are raising the assumption of risk and the risk of force being used against you. And again, that's unfortunately what took place on Saturday.
Officials are rejecting calls for investigation into these 2 shootings and shutting down questions from journalists. But statements by witnesses, family members, and local authorities, not to mention multiple videos taken on the scene, have contradicted the government's statements. And there is more in question than the details of these specific events. Does the US government actually have the right to deploy masked agents with lethal power and apparent immunity? Does US law agree with the government about what it can do and its citizens cannot? And if authorities are in fact breaking the law, can the law do anything about it? We're joined now by Rachel Moran, law professor from the University of St. Thomas, an expert in law enforcement accountability. Welcome, Rachel Moran. I'm hoping you can help us out with a little bit of legal fact-checking here. We've just spoken to a protester in Minneapolis who works with an organization dedicated to ending immigration raids and deportations. Now, the government is saying that this is what they were voted in to do, and any obstruction goes against the law. In extreme cases, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem says that this behaviour may make you a domestic terrorist. It may justify lethal force. Let's just take a look at what she said.
When you perpetuate violence against a government because of ideological reasons and for reasons to resist and perpetuate violence, that is the definition of domestic terrorism. This individual who came with weapons and ammunition to stop a law enforcement operation of federal law enforcement officers committed an act of domestic terrorism. That's the facts.
Is this true? And can you just talk us through what are protesters' rights when it comes to what's happening right now with ICE?
Sure, I'm happy to walk you through. In answer to your first question, no. The Secretary of Homeland Security made demonstrably false statements about the shooting of Alex Pretty. And I don't know if she knew it or if she was just recklessly quoting Greg Bovino or taking the story of federal agents who weren't telling the truth. I don't know, but I do know that what she said was wrong. And it's incredibly damaging to Mr. Pretty, but also damaging to any shred of credibility that the Department of Homeland Security had. In terms of protesters' rights, they have the right to observe, they have the right to record, they have the right to yell things, they have the right to be very close to officers. What they can't do is forcibly interfere or engage in violence or property damage. That's what the First Amendment does not protect.
And when do officers have the right to respond with deadly force according to US law?
Well, Minnesota actually has a law that specifically speaks to this. It's called use of deadly force by a peace officer. And basically what it says is that any law enforcement officer can use deadly force only when a reasonable officer would believe it is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm. So that's the only time when they can legally use deadly force.
Thank you. Now let's just compare that to what US Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller said addressing ICE agents on TV. This speech is from October, but it was retweeted by the Department of Homeland Security after Renee Good's shooting.
To all ICE officers, you have federal immunity in the conduct of your duties. And anybody who lays a hand on you or tries to stop you or tries to obstruct you is committing a felony. You have immunity to perform your duties, and no one, no city official, no state official, no illegal alien, no leftist agitator or domestic insurrectionist can prevent you from fulfilling your legal obligations and duties. And the Department of Justice has made clear that if officials cross that line into obstruction, into criminal conspiracy against the United States or against ICE officers, then they will face justice.
Is that true? Do federal agents have immunity in the conduct of their orders? Do they have immunity from state investigation and prosecution?
They don't have absolute immunity, and that's another falsehood that the administration has been saying. That's something, as we just heard, Stephen Miller has said. That's something the vice president has repeatedly said. Now, I will say the prosecution of federal agents is a little more complicated than the prosecution of just anyone on the street. But state officials still do have the right to enforce state crimes if they've happened. And just because someone's a federal officer when they commit a crime, that doesn't give them total immunity. So the prosecution is a little bit complex, but there's no such thing as absolute immunity for these officers.
I want to talk now about the masking of ICE officers, right? For a law enforcement body to be masked by default, this is incredibly unusual in modern democratic states. Legally, what justification is there for law enforcement to wear face masks and to act with total anonymity? When is that required? When is that allowed?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And it gets a little complicated because mostly this has been a policy issue where, for I think pretty obvious reasons, we don't have law enforcement agencies doing this. It creates an enormous amount of distrust in the community. It's threatening. It can even lead to hostile interactions that wouldn't be happening if agents were uniformed and identifiable by face and name. You're absolutely right that as an international norm as well, this is very, very unusual. As a legal matter, though, it is a little bit tricky. There are a lot of states trying to figure out, can we prevent federal agents from doing this when they come to our state? California has tried, and that's currently under litigation. It's a little hard to say whether, as a legal matter, the states can require the federal government not to mask.
Now, face coverings are just one way in which the powers of ICE agents have been expanding. It was announced this week, for example, that they can now enter homes without a warrant. And it's not just their power that's expanding. The size of the force has almost doubled since Trump came in, at the cost, apparently, of vetting standards. To quote one journalist who got offered a job after a 6-minute interview, they're taking anyone with a pulse. They also, however, appear to be targeting specific groups, some analysts are saying. For example, those who stormed the US Capitol on January 6th after Trump lost the 2016 election. Far right, not 2016, the previous election. But these are far-right extremists, right? Groups like the Proud Boys, who actually reposted an ICE ad with the line "message received." So I'm curious what legal protections are in place to prevent, say, a US president building up his own personal army in the guise of law enforcement.
So some of the power grabs you're talking about, like the claim that they can enter homes without warrants, I mean, those are power grabs. They're attempts to claim powers that the law actually hasn't recognized. And so there are a ton of lawyers filing lawsuits about issues exactly like this and trying to get judges to say, you do not have the power that you are claiming. And I think that's really important. It can feel discouraging. I'm right here in Minneapolis. It's been an incredibly difficult last several weeks in particular. But there are a lot of lawyers at least fighting back. And there are judges saying, no, you don't get to do these things. So it's an ongoing tension. It's an ongoing legal battle in terms of ICE claiming they can do things or the federal government claiming they have powers. And then ordinary people and lawyers resisting those powers.
And if the Trump administration wins these legal battles and essentially ICE agents in these shootings and more broadly are given impunity in practice, how dangerous is that precedent?
Incredibly dangerous. We have experienced 2 violent deaths here in Minneapolis and many, many other people who've been attacked and brutalized. It's not something I've lived through before. It would be incredibly dangerous for courts to rubber stamp these kind of activities. It does feel like we are in a battle for the soul of our city and on behalf of the nation in many ways.
Rachel Moran, thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. And now, for now, that is all that we have time for. But before we lose you, we would love to hear from you. Please send in your thoughts and questions to @MiddleEastEye on any social media platform or email meelive@middleeasteye.net. We'll be here at 5 p.m. GMT, noon if you're in New York, every Tuesday and Thursday. See you then.